My name is Martha Reynolds, 32 years old. The clinking of silverware was the only sound cutting through the thick, uncomfortable air in my parents' dining room. The chandelier, my mother's prized antique, cast fractured light over our faces, catching the edges of crystal glasses and the quiet tension we'd all learned to ignore. Sunday dinners at the Reynolds estate had always felt more like performance art than family tradition. Martha, dear, how's that little consulting thing going? My mother asked, her tone dripping with the kind of politeness that hides a blade. I forced a smile. Still going. Clients keep me busy. Marcus chuckled from across the table, swirling his wine like a man rehearsing for applause. Busy with what? Watching stock charts in your pajamas? Jennifer, my younger sister, forever glued to her phone, snickered. Don't tease her, Marcus. Some people just like staying small. The words hit their usual mark, but I didn't flinch. I'd learned long ago that my silence bothered them more than my defense ever could. Then Marcus leaned back, smirk widening. Speaking of small, Martha, you should actually thank me. I sold those dusty old stocks you had sitting in the joint account. Got a good deal, too. 47 grand, cash. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. My fork froze midair. You what? He raised his glass in mock celebration. Sold them. The ones Dad set up for us years ago. They were dead weight anyway. My mother's diamond bracelet sparkled as she waved dismissively. Honestly, darling, Marcus is right. You never did anything with them. Might as well let someone who understands money handle it. They weren't your stocks to sell, I said evenly, my voice barely above a whisper. Oh, here we go, Marcus sighed, rolling his eyes. Don't make this dramatic. You've been playing investor for years, and it's embarrassing. Those things were junk, Martha. You should be grateful I turned them into something real. Real, I repeated, staring down at my plate. The edges of my vision pulsed. The words, 47 grand, echoing in my head like gunfire. I knew exactly what he'd done and what it meant. My father cut into his steak, calm and cold. Your brother knows business, Martha. You've had access to that account for years and never produced anything tangible. Let's not pretend you're Warren Buffett. Jennifer giggled. Exactly. I mean, come on, stocks? So boring. Marcus is opening a restaurant in the business district next month. Now that's something worth bragging about. Marcus gave her a wink. That's right. Real assets, not imaginary numbers on a screen. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, but like glass cracking under pressure. Marcus, I said, looking straight at him for the first time that night. When did you sell them? This afternoon. He grinned, clearly enjoying the spotlight. Cash buyer, no fuss. Guy named Peterson. Said he'd take the whole batch without questions. Deposited the money at 347. Want to see the slip? He pulled out his phone and proudly displayed the confirmation. I leaned forward slightly, my heartbeat steady but my mind racing. Peterson. Cash. No oversight. Marcus, I said softly, those weren't penny stocks. They were Series G federal investment securities. He frowned. You mean government stocks? Whatever. They're still mine too. Joint account, remember? My mother sighed as if this was all so tedious. Martha, please don't start your lectures. You and your fancy terms. Just let your brother handle things for once. You sold federally protected securities, I said, still calm, still controlled, without authorization. To a cash buyer. That's not just a bad decision, Marcus. That's a felony. His face twitched, but he quickly laughed it off. You're ridiculous. They were worthless. Nobody's coming after me for flipping some dead government bonds. Jennifer muttered, God, you're so dramatic. It's just money. I stood up slowly, pulling my phone from my pocket. Actually, it's more than money. My father's brow furrowed. Martha, sit down. What are you doing? I scrolled to a contact I never thought I'd have to call in this context. Doing what my job requires me to do, Marcus sneered. Oh, what, calling your imaginary office? I pressed the phone to my ear. Director Hayes, this is Senior Analyst Reynolds. I'm initiating SEC Protocol 7, authorization code Delta Tango 973. The table went dead silent. Marcus's laughter faltered. Martha, what the hell are you talking about? Yes, ma'am, I continued into the phone, my tone professional. Full unauthorized sale of protected government securities. Series G classification. Joint account violation. Buyer identified as Peterson. Cash deposit $47,000 at 15:47 hours today. My father stood up abruptly. Martha! I met his gaze, expression flat. Yes, Director. Location confirmed. Reynolds Residence, 324 Rivergate. I'll secure the premises and all witnesses. Understood. Marcus's smirk finally disappeared. Martha, stop. You can't. Too late, I interrupted, ending the call. They're already on their way. Jennifer's fork clattered to her plate. Who's on their way? I looked around the table at the faces that had spent years dismissing me, as if my quiet work meant nothing, as if my worth began and ended with their approval. The Federal Securities Division, I said, and the FBI. For the first time in my life, no one had anything to say. Outside, the night air was still. Then, faintly, the hum of approaching engines broke the silence. The hum grew louder, a deep mechanical purr that didn't belong in our quiet neighborhood. I glanced through the frosted window by the front door. Headlights sliced through the dark like searchlights. My mother's voice trembled. Martha, what did you do? I did my job, I said simply, though my pulse thundered in my ears. Within seconds, the driveway filled with black SUVs. Men and women in navy jackets stepped out, the bold yellow letters FBI and SEC glowing under the porch lights. It was surreal, like watching a scene from one of those political thrillers Marcus always mocked me for enjoying. Only this wasn't a movie. This was our dinner table turning into a federal crime scene. The doorbell rang. Once. Clear. Authoritative. My father's voice cracked. Don't answer it. I turned the handle anyway. On the porch stood Director Hayes, flanked by 2 FBI agents and 3 SEC officers. She was as imposing as I remembered. Silver hair, razor-sharp posture, and eyes that could slice through glass. Senior Analyst Reynolds, she greeted, voice crisp. We received your report. Given the classification and value, we mobilized immediately. Thank you, Director, I replied, stepping aside. The subject is in the dining room. Subject? Marcus barked from behind me. I'm your brother, not a criminal suspect, finished one of the agents, a tall man who flashed his badge. Special Agent Rodriguez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We'll be taking statements from everyone present. My mother gasped. Statements? You can't just barge in here. Hayes's tone turned cool. Ma'am, your son sold $812,000 worth of federally protected securities to a cash buyer. We're well within protocol. Marcus stumbled backward, pale now. That can't be right. They weren't worth that much. They were, I said quietly. You sold them for $47,000. You didn't just lose money. You triggered federal alerts. Agent Rodriguez motioned toward Marcus. Sir, I'll need you to remain seated. Keep your hands visible. My father stepped forward, voice shaking with restrained anger. You can't treat my son like this. I'm a retired attorney, and... Hayes interrupted. Then you know how serious this is, Mr. Reynolds. The account was joint access, not joint ownership. Your son's sale constitutes unauthorized liquidation of government property. My mother pressed a hand to her chest. Government property? That's absurd. Martha's just trying to make a point. Ma'am, Hayes said firmly, federal securities carry tracking protocols. The moment your son sold them, alarms went off across 3 systems. Jennifer whispered, Oh my God, her phone slipping from her hand. Rodriguez nodded to his partner, a sharp-eyed woman with a tablet. Agent Chin, document the scene. I stood back as photos were taken, evidence bags produced, and my family's world began to collapse around the fine china plates. Marcus Reynolds, Rodriguez said, producing a form. You are being detained for questioning in connection to federal securities fraud and money laundering allegations. You have the right to remain silent. This is insane, Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. Martha, tell them I didn't know. I didn't know. Knowing or not doesn't matter, Hayes replied, her tone surgical. Intent isn't needed when federal assets are sold, but text messages or emails could establish knowledge. We'll see what your devices say. Rodriguez gestured, and Agent Chin confiscated Marcus's phone. My mother lunged forward, but I caught her wrist. Mom, I said softly, don't interfere, please. Her eyes filled with tears. How can you stand there like this? He's your brother. I swallowed hard. I'm also a federal officer. If I hadn't reported it, I'd lose my clearance and face obstruction charges. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Hayes turned to me. We'll need your verification. I nodded and took this tablet from her. My fingers scrolled through the familiar series codes. The numbers burned into my brain from years of analysis. These are the securities, I confirmed. Series G, issued under the Strategic Asset Program between 2019 and 2024. Current total value, $812,340. Jennifer blinked, whispering, You actually work with this stuff? I always have, I said without looking up. Rodriguez cuffed Marcus's wrist gently but firmly. Sir, you're being detained, not arrested. Yet. You'll be questioned at the field office. My father slammed his hand against the table. You can't do this. Hayes met his eyes without flinching. Mr. Reynolds, your son sold protected government property for cash. That's multiple felonies. We can do this. As they led Marcus toward the front door, he turned to me, desperation cutting through the arrogance. Martha, please, I'll fix it. I'll get the money back. You can't fix this, Marcus, I said quietly. You didn't just sell my stocks. You sold part of the federal government's investment infrastructure. His jaw trembled. I didn't know. That's what every white-collar criminal says, Agent Chin muttered. Hayes gave me a small nod. You handled this exactly right, Analyst Reynolds. I'll expect your formal report tomorrow morning. As they stepped outside, the reflection of flashing lights danced across the chandelier. The once proud symbol of my mother's taste now looked fractured, shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces. My father sank back into his chair, eyes vacant. My mother started to cry. Jennifer sat frozen, staring at her phone screen like the world had gone off script. And me? I stood there, hands trembling, but voice steady, realizing that for the first time in my life, they finally saw who I was. Outside, the agents loaded Marcus into one of the SUVs. The door shut with a dull, final thud that echoed through the house. The lights began to fade into the night, and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. Calm, cold, and utterly alone. The family dinner was over. The reckoning had begun. By the time the last SUV disappeared down the street, the house felt like a mausoleum, too quiet, too neat, too perfectly staged for a life that had just collapsed. The chandelier still glowed, but its light was cruel now, illuminating the untouched plates, the spilled wine, the roast that had gone cold. I stood near the window as the second wave of agents, financial forensics, arrived. Their calm professionalism only deepened the dread. Clipboards, evidence bags, soft radio chatter. My mother wrung her hands. My father paced, muttering about overreach and civil procedure. Jennifer, for once, had set her phone face down, her mascara smeared like black tears. Mrs. Reynolds, said Officer Park, an SEC investigator with calm eyes and a steady voice, we'll need access to all family computers, phones, and financial records. This will go faster if you cooperate. My son's already in handcuffs, my mother said hoarsely. What else do you want from us? Park didn't flinch. The truth. She sank into a chair, sobbing quietly. Meanwhile, Agent Chin approached me with a tablet. Analyst Reynolds, we need confirmation of your employment verification and ownership documentation. I handed over my ID badge and digital certificate, already linked to my personnel file, I said. Everything should match. She nodded. It does. Her tone softened. You handled that call cleanly, by the way. Not many people could stay that composed watching their own brother get detained. I smiled faintly. 6 years in federal intelligence trains you for ugly moments. But the truth? I wasn't composed. My pulse was still erratic, my throat dry, my stomach twisted into knots. My professional detachment was the only armor I had left. In the dining room, my father was grilling another agent. You're basing this entire case on an account title? That's absurd. The funds were shared. Park stepped in smoothly. Joint access, not joint ownership, sir. Your son liquidated assets assigned to your daughter's federal securities clearance. That's theft and unauthorized distribution of government property. My father's expression faltered, but he didn't know. Intent won't save him, Park said gently. Ignorance of the law doesn't void the crime. From the corner of my eye, I saw Jennifer trembling, her hands clutching a wine glass like it was a lifeline. He's not a criminal, she whispered. He just made a mistake. I turned toward her. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill. Selling protected securities to a known cash buyer is a crime. Her voice cracked. You sound like one of them. You're supposed to be his sister. And I'm also a federal analyst, I said quietly. The difference is I understand what those numbers meant. Her eyes filled with tears. We didn't know what you actually did. You never told us. I tried, I said, and my voice trembled for the first time that night. You just never listened. Agent Rodriguez re-entered, holding a laptop bag. We'll be taking this to the lab, he said. Mr. Reynolds' work device contains multiple large cash deposit records, all just under the reporting threshold. Park sighed. Structuring. Classic. What does that mean? My father demanded. It means your son deliberately made smaller deposits to avoid triggering mandatory reporting, Rodriguez said. That's another felony. My mother moaned softly, pressing a napkin to her lips. The air grew heavier. The only sound was the agent's measured footsteps and the soft clicks of evidence seals closing. Hayes returned from outside, her voice crisp. We've identified the buyer, Jonathan Peterson, known to the Bureau, on a watch list for questionable financial activity. That name again, Peterson. I frowned. Peterson was on a watch list? 18 months, Hayes confirmed. Your brother didn't stumble onto him by chance. This looks deliberate. The room spun slightly. Deliberate? I echoed. Hayes studied me carefully. We'll know more once we go through the messages, but from what we've already seen, there are several exchanges where your brother requested a cash-only deal and no paper trail. That language implies intent to conceal. My stomach turned. Marcus, the brother who mocked my imaginary office, had negotiated with a flagged buyer, consciously avoiding oversight. Jennifer's voice broke. He just didn't want taxes. Rodriguez exhaled. That's not how the IRS or the FBI sees it. I turned away, gripping the edge of the table for balance. For years, my family had made me feel like the smallest person in the room. Quiet, forgettable, insignificant. But right now, I was the only one keeping this entire nightmare from spiraling further out of control. Hayes touched my shoulder lightly. You did the right thing, Martha. You didn't create this mess. You reported it. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. I know, but it doesn't make it easier to watch. Family rarely makes it easy, she said quietly, especially when truth replaces illusion. Her words lingered long after she left. The agents packed up the first wave of evidence and exited, leaving only faint traces. Coffee cups, notes, fingerprint powder on glassware. My parents sat together on the couch, stunned and silent. Jennifer hovered near the window, her reflection trembling in the glass. I looked around the room, our family portraits on the wall, the smiling faces frozen in happier times, all the Sunday dinners, all the subtle jabs, all the times they said, "You'll understand real success when you're older." I was older now, and apparently, success meant watching my family learn the law the hard way. Outside, the flashing lights faded, but inside, the echoes remained. The weight of every word unspoken, every truth ignored, every insult I'd quietly swallowed. The night wasn't over, not by a long shot. Because as I stepped outside to breathe, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Unknown. We need to talk about what your brother sold me. The sender's name appeared beneath it. Jonathan Peterson. I froze, staring at the screen. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere inside, my mother began to cry again. And I knew, deep in my gut, this was only the beginning. I didn't reply to Peterson's message that night. Instead, I walked back into the house where the air felt heavier than before, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My father sat slumped in his chair, staring into his untouched glass of scotch. My mother had gone pale, her eyes red from crying. Jennifer was pacing with her arms crossed, muttering to herself in disbelief. "Martha," my father said finally, voice low and cracking, "you need to call them. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. Your brother didn't know what he was doing." "He knew enough to ask for cash," I said quietly, "and he knew enough to sell something that didn't belong to him." "That's not the point," he snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "He's your brother. Family doesn't turn on family like this." I met his gaze steadily. "No, Dad, family doesn't steal from family like this." That silenced him for a moment. The clock ticked loudly, the sound suddenly unbearable. My mother's voice came out small, brittle. "You've always been so cold, Martha, always distant. You could have found another way." "Another way?" I echoed, letting out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "What other way, Mom? If I hadn't reported it, I'd lose my job, my clearance, my entire career. You'd have 2 children in trouble instead of 1. She flinched, pressing a tissue to her mouth. "We never asked for your career to come before your family." "No," I said softly. "You just never believed it was a real career." Jennifer finally stopped pacing. "You know, this is insane. We're going to be the talk of the neighborhood. Marcus could lose everything. And you?" I cut her off sharply. "He already has." The words hung between us like a verdict. I turned to leave. I'd had enough of the crying, the denial, the half-accusations that I was somehow the villain for doing my job. But as I reached for my coat, my phone buzzed again. "Unknown. Please. I didn't know those securities were federal. I just want to make it right. We can talk." Jonathan Peterson. The moment I saw his name again, a chill ran through me. He shouldn't have had my number, unless Marcus had given it to him. I hesitated, then tapped the message open and switched to speaker. "This is Senior Analyst Reynolds," I said carefully. You're contacting a federal officer. This call is being monitored. A pause, then a voice, smooth and trembling slightly. Martha, I swear, I didn't know what your brother was selling me. I thought they were old stock shares. I'll return them. Every document, every certificate. Just no lawyers, okay? Mr. Peterson, I said evenly, the FBI already has your name and transaction record. There's nothing you can fix with me directly. You need to speak with your attorney. He cursed under his breath. You don't understand. If this goes public, I'm done. My company, my investors, everything will collapse. I can make this disappear quietly. I'll pay whatever your brother lost. You mean the $47,000 he sold $800,000 of securities for? I said. He went silent. Mr. Peterson, I continued, this conversation is being recorded. Anything you say will be submitted as evidence. There was a sharp inhale, then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the dark screen. Behind me, my father demanded, Who was that? The buyer, I said. He's panicking. My mother's voice wavered. Can't you use that? Make a deal? Fix this? Anything? I shook my head. It's out of my hands. The Bureau will handle it. Jennifer folded her arms. You make it sound so easy. You just call the FBI, ruin your brother's life, and then what? Go back to work like nothing happened? I turned to her, my tone calm but ice-edged. You all mocked my work for years, called me lazy, said I wasn't ambitious like Marcus. Tonight, that meaningless job was the reason I knew how to stop your brother from committing more felonies. That's what I go back to tomorrow, doing my job, because someone in this family has to know right from wrong. For the first time in years, Jennifer didn't have a comeback. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. My father called after me, his voice breaking. You walk out that door, Martha. You walk away from this family for good. I stopped, hand on the doorknob, and looked back at him. No, Dad. You all walked away a long time ago. You just didn't notice because I was too quiet about it. Then I left. Outside, the night was cool, the air sharp with the scent of rain. The flashing lights were gone, replaced by the echo of my heels on the marble steps. The estate behind me looked smaller than I'd ever seen it, not in size, but in significance. I got into my car, closed the door, and sat in the silence. My phone buzzed again. A message from Director Hayes. Hayes, good work tonight. Preliminary forensics show Peterson's a known securities broker flagged for prior laundering schemes. We'll keep you updated. Get some rest. I exhaled, a bitter laugh catching in my throat. Rest. How do you rest when the truth has just detonated in the center of your family? The next morning, my name was on every internal report at the SEC. My inbox filled with alerts, case updates, procedural commendations, words like integrity, protocol adherence, and commendation consideration appeared again and again. But none of them meant anything when I thought of my mother's tears, my father's silence, or Marcus's face as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. By noon, the Bureau confirmed Peterson's arrest. The message was short and factual. Subject detained. Confirmed knowing participation. I stared at the notification for a long time before locking my phone. For the first time in years, I had everything I'd ever wanted, proof that I wasn't the failure they believed me to be. And yet I'd never felt emptier. 6 months later, the marble steps of the federal courthouse of Riverside gleamed under the noon sun. Reporters buzzed outside the doors, cameras clicking like cicadas. My heels echoed against the stone as I walked past them, head high, credentials tucked neatly in my bag. It wasn't the first time I'd testified in court, but it was the first time the defendant wore my last name. Inside, the air was cool and sterile. Every word bounced sharply off the polished walls. I found my seat behind the prosecution table, surrounded by files I could have recited in my sleep. Marcus sat at the defense table, thinner than I remembered. The swagger was gone, replaced by hollow eyes and a tremor in his hands. His once perfect suit hung loose, like it belonged to another man. When his eyes met mine, I saw accusation, and something darker. Resentment. Case of United States v. Marcus Reynolds, the bailiff announced. Judge Whitaker entered. Everyone rose, then sat in a synchronized rustle of tension. The Assistant U.S. Attorney, Michelle Torres, began her statement. Your Honor, the defendant knowingly sold federally protected securities valued at over $800,000 to a known money laundering broker. He structured cash transactions to avoid reporting, falsified documentation, and attempted to conceal the sale from federal monitoring systems. Each word was measured, clinical, like a scalpel carving through years of pretense. Marcus's attorney, a weary-looking man with silver hair, countered. My client acted out of ignorance, not malice. He was misled about the nature of these securities. This was negligence, not fraud. Torres's lips curved slightly. Then perhaps we should ask why he requested a cash-only sale with no paper trail, and why his buyer, Mr. Peterson, has already pleaded guilty and testified that your client was fully aware of the transaction's illegality. The courtroom murmured. My parents sat behind Marcus, my mother's hand gripping my father's arm, white-knuckled. Jennifer wasn't there. She couldn't face the cameras. The first witnesses testified. Agents, accountants, forensic analysts. One by one, they confirmed every detail. The joint account, the deposits, the emails. Then the prosecutor called me. I stood, adjusted my blazer, and approached the stand. Every step felt like crossing a minefield of memory. State your name and occupation, Torres said. Martha Reynolds, I answered. Supervisory Financial Intelligence Analyst, Securities and Exchange Commission. You're the defendant's sister? Yes. She nodded. Can you describe your role in discovering the crime? I told them. About the dinner, the confession disguised as bragging, the call to Hayes, the agents, the arrest. My voice never broke, though my throat burned with every sentence. Torres stepped closer. Why did you report him? Because it was my duty, I said simply. If I hadn't, I would have been complicit. The defense attorney stood for cross-examination. Ms. Reynolds, you say you had no choice, but surely, given this was your brother, you could have tried to resolve it privately before involving federal authorities. I met his gaze. A private solution doesn't exist for federal crimes, sir. He raised a brow. Even at the cost of your family? There it was, the question everyone wanted answered. I looked at Marcus. His jaw was tight, his eyes full of venom. My family taught me that loyalty means silence, I said quietly, but I learned that silence only protects the guilty. A hush spread through the room. Even Torres paused before speaking again. No further questions, the defense murmured, sitting down. Hours passed. Evidence stacked up like bricks in a wall Marcus could no longer climb. Texts surfaced, him mocking me, bragging to Peterson that his uptight sister wouldn't notice until it was too late. The jury's expressions hardened. When closing statements ended, the judge recessed for deliberation. My parents didn't look at me as I left the stand. They looked at Marcus as if willing him to somehow undo what was already written. The verdict came faster than I expected, guilty on all counts. Marcus slumped in his chair, his hands trembling. My mother gasped. My father muttered something that sounded like prayer. Then came the sentencing. Torres spoke first. The defendant's deliberate deception, coordination with a known criminal, and breach of fiduciary trust warrant significant incarceration. The government recommends 14 years federal confinement, $450,000 in fines, and asset forfeiture of all business properties obtained through illicit profit. The defense begged for leniency, cited community service, restaurant employment, family dependence. None of it mattered. Then the judge turned to me. Ms. Reynolds, as the primary victim in this matter, would you like to make a statement? I rose. My hand shook slightly, but my voice didn't. Your Honor, I began, my brother didn't just steal government securities. He stole my credibility in my family's eyes. For years, I've worked in silence, doing a job they thought was meaningless. When Marcus sold those securities, he did it because he believed I was too powerless to stop him, because he couldn't imagine that I, the sister who never raised her voice, might actually have authority. I glanced at him. His eyes glistened. Whether from anger or shame, I couldn't tell. I don't hate my brother, I continued softly, but I can't protect him from the consequences of what he chose. Maybe in prison, he'll learn that respect isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. Silence filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, please stand. Marcus rose, barely holding himself together. Given the evidence, testimony, and the defendant's lack of remorse until conviction, this court sentences you to 14 years in federal prison, $450,000 in fines, and the forfeiture of 3 business assets. The gavel struck once. Final. Marcus turned toward me as they cuffed him. You think this makes you better than us? He hissed. I held his gaze. No, Marcus, it makes me free. The bailiff led him away. My mother sobbed quietly. My father's eyes were hollow. I stood alone in that courtroom, surrounded by everything my family had built, reputation, wealth, pretense, now shattered by their own hands. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. microphones shoved close. Ms. Reynolds, any comment on your brother's sentencing? I paused on the courthouse steps, the same sunlight gleaming off their lenses. Justice, I said simply, and kept walking. 6 months later, I sat at a long mahogany table inside the SEC headquarters, a nameplate with my new title in front of me, Supervisory Analyst Martha Reynolds. The promotion had come quietly. No party, no fanfare, just an email stamped approved and a brief handshake from Director Hayes. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I'd longed for my family's approval, and now the only validation that mattered came from the same government they'd mocked me for serving. Hayes raised her glass at the small staff dinner that followed. To integrity, she said, her tone warm but sharp, and to those who uphold it, even when it costs them everything. I managed a small smile, murmuring a thank you. Inside, though, I felt the familiar ache of silence, the kind that used to follow every family dinner, now amplified by absence. When the evening ended, I drove home alone to my modest apartment, the one Marcus once called a shoebox. I unlocked the door, kicked off my heels, and let the hum of the refrigerator be my company. The glow from the city filtered through the blinds. My desk was neatly arranged, laptop closed, phone charging beside it. Everything in order, everything under control, until the phone vibrated. Unknown number. I already knew who it was before I answered. Martha Reynolds, I said calmly. A faint voice came through, low and strained. I hope you're happy. Marcus. 14 years, he continued bitterly. 14 years in a concrete box. You destroyed our family for your precious rules. I closed my eyes. No, Marcus, I enforce them. There's a difference. He let out a humorless laugh. You always did think you were better than us. You never cared about family, only your career. That's not true, I said softly. I cared. I just stopped excusing what was wrong. He went silent. I could hear the hum of the prison line, the echo of distance between us. Do you know what it's like in here? He asked finally. To wake up every morning and know you're the villain in everyone's story? I hesitated. I've known that feeling my whole life, Marcus, just not behind bars. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a moment before deleting the call log entirely. Some endings don't need saving. Over the next weeks, news of the case faded from headlines. My parents sold the estate to pay legal fees. They moved into a quiet suburban condo, their names absent from social circles that once courted them. Jennifer's influencer career crashed after the tabloids surfaced her connection to the trial. Brand deals vanished. Sponsors fled. She texted me once, "You ruined everything." I didn't reply. But late one night, curiosity won. I searched her name online. The once flawless feed of luxury photos had turned into sporadic, bitter posts, quotes about loyalty, forgiveness, and family betrayal. The comment sections were full of strangers debating our lives. I shut the laptop. I'd had enough judgment for one lifetime. A few days later, Director Hayes stopped by my office. You've handled this better than most would, she said, but the Bureau's offering counseling for all agents involved in family-related cases. I suggest you take it. I'm fine, I told her. She gave a knowing look. That's what every analyst says. Then they burn out quietly. After she left, I stared at the empty coffee cup on my desk. The truth was, I wasn't fine, but I was functional, and for me, that was enough. That weekend, I visited the courthouse archive to sign off on the final closure documents. As I exited, I caught sight of a woman outside holding her son's hand. Small, innocent, asking questions she probably couldn't answer. It hit me suddenly. Family isn't just about blood, it's about trust. And once it's broken, it never returns the same way. Driving home, I passed the turnoff to my parents' new neighborhood. For a second, I almost turned the wheel. Almost. Then I kept driving. Back at my apartment, I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and began drafting a new compliance policy proposal. Work was easier than emotion, logic simpler than forgiveness. Before midnight, I paused and looked out the window. The city glimmered below, quiet, endless, alive. Somewhere out there, my family was rebuilding their lives, piece by piece. Maybe one day they'd understand that I didn't destroy us. I just revealed what we'd been pretending not to see. I picked up my phone, opened the old family group chat, and stared at the last message. Marcus's taunting line from a year ago, guess who's expanding his restaurant empire? I typed a reply but never sent it. Instead, I whispered it into the quiet room. They taught me silence meant weakness. I taught them silence can sign a warrant. Then I turned off the light.